Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever you are in the world today. My name is Herb and I'm an alcoholic. That's my website. It has lots of resources on it if you have not visited it. herbk.com, pretty straightforward, very simple. herbk.com. We're here to talk about the 12 concepts. Beginning the discussion in earnest, we had an opening orientation last month. We had a rather skinny group in the sense of volume, but it was conducted, it was enjoyable, and it was recorded and edited, and it's been placed on YouTube. So if you're interested in some overview and context and some general discussion about the concepts and what we're going to be doing in the next 6 months, you're welcome to go to YouTube, my playlist on the concepts. It would probably be under Path to Freedom. That's the overarching theme or title for this series. Last year, Path to Freedom was the steps. Pretty much one step a month. Modified a little bit because of the volume of material in step 4 and the paucity of material in steps 5, 6, and 7. So we divided it differently than just 1 month at a time. This year, I've decided to do the traditions this first 6 months and the concepts the last 6 months of this year, so that we've got at least some discussion about the legacies that Bill Wilson left us. 3 legacies. First, before we begin, let's pray for an open mind and open heart. And we're praying for it because, in fact, even though we're willing, we can't affect it. So we ask for help, spiritual intervention. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, the 12 concepts, my practical application, and you. For an open mind and a new experience with myself, the 12 concepts, my practical application, and especially you. Please join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Welcome to our discussion. And that's what I'm hoping it will be. Very little teaching on my part, at least by my standards. And I would like to start with a meditation that I've found in the language of the heart. We have 3 legacies, as I mentioned in my opening comments, and many people may not be familiar with the term legacy. It just means what Bill left us as solid tools to navigate life, certainly to navigate our addiction, to navigate our recovery process in the fellowships, and then to sustain the fellowship itself. That first legacy is included in the big book, published in April of 1939. The 12 steps. Prior to that, there were only 6. The Oxford group. That's a story for a different day as to how that developed. It's a textbook that precisely describes the application of each of the steps. Any of you who have been exposed to me know that I regularly say, I'm reasonably intelligent, fairly well educated, and I read English, but I could not on my own read and understand and apply the material in the big book. I needed a step guide. If you haven't had that experience, the sponsor might do if they've got knowledge of and an experience with the big book in the same way I'm talking about it, a precise application of the suggested process for awakening or transformation. Many people think they've been through the steps and they understand the big book. And God bless them. It's the best that they've been exposed to and the best that they could do at that time. I was 4 years sober when I got exposed to a big book mechanic. The rest is history. After that, I discovered that I had an interest in the traditions. Before that, I didn't. After that, once I had my spiritual awakening through the steps, I became interested in then what else Bill had left us. These 12 traditions were certified in 1950 First International Conference. As I mentioned, those were the subject of the first 6 months of this year. But I also have on my YouTube playlist a 14-week workshop that's on YouTube. And it's been edited. It's much broader and deeper than we went this year for perhaps obvious reasons. It doesn't matter. Both are very good introductions to each of the 12 traditions and the application to the traditions to our personal life. The traditions weren't written necessarily for our personal life. They were written for the groups themselves to survive both as a group and amongst the groups. Now the concepts. I'm so pleased to see such a nice gathering today of people interested in the concepts. We get large groups on the steps. We get smaller, but still large groups to talk about traditions. We had very small groups to talk about the concepts. They're a bit esoteric in a way. They're a bit not practical from a daily basis. Certainly anybody who is in the service structure of their 12-step fellowship would be well served to have some type of knowledge of and working application of the 12 concepts. That's the third tradition, the third legacy that was ratified and adopted in 1955 in the Second International Conference. So what is the third legacy? I'm reading now this meditation from the book, Language of the Heart. If you don't have the book, I really recommend that you get it. If you haven't read it recently, I really recommend that you put it on your list of reading, and maybe not all at once, but it serves very well at periodic reading of the different aspects of the material in that book. What is the third legacy? Page 160. Our 12th step, carrying the message, is the basic service that AA's fellowship gives. This is our principal aim and the main reason for our existence. Therefore, AA is more than a set of principles. It is a society of alcoholics in action. We must carry the message, else we ourselves can wither, and those who haven't been given the truth will die. This is the whole point, is to carry the message. From step 12, having had a spiritual awakening, we tried to carry this message, the message that you can have a spiritual awakening by applying the 12 steps to your personal life. That's the total purpose of step 12, or the message of step 12. Hence, an AA service is anything, whatever, that helps us to reach a fellow sufferer, ranging all the way from the 12th step itself to a 10-cent phone call. You can see when this was written, and a cup of coffee, and to AA's General Service Headquarters for national and international action. The sum total of all these services is the third legacy. The steps are how the person recovers. The traditions maintains the unity of the fellowship, but the concepts are the suggestions for how to operate a nonprofit spiritual organization. How does a spiritual organization operate? Bill's brilliance certainly is revealed in the steps and then in the traditions. He crafted them. He promoted those traditions despite all of the resistance. One of the famous lines is in the conversations he had about traditions: we don't need any laws, we don't need any regulations. There's only 2 disciplines in Alcoholics Anonymous. You could broaden that to any one of your 12-step fellowships if it's other than Alcoholics Anonymous. There's only 2 disciplines in Alcoholics Anonymous. One is God and one is alcohol. We're either going for one or we're going for the other. I mean, that's in your face. That's very confrontational. I hope you can hear it, embrace it, at some point accept it. We're at that fork in the road that he talks about a couple times in the big book, always at the fork in the road, because we have a choice. We have free will. That's the thing that makes us specifically human. We have free will. Not so free in addiction, first half of the first step, not so free in unmanageability, second half of the first step, but very free in step 2, page 53 of the big book. Step 2, chapter 4, page 53. If you're not familiar with it or haven't looked at it recently, page 53. Step 2, God is or God isn't. What is your choice? Now, you can use whatever word or concept that you want, that you need, that you're willing to embrace. It doesn't have to be the God word. God is or God isn't. We're at the fork in the road. We either choose darkness or we choose light, consciously or unconsciously. We either choose darkness, our addiction, or we choose light, whatever that life source, force, energy is. There's no equivocation. There's no neutrality or stopping point for the dimmer switch. It's either going up toward the light or it's going down toward the darkness. He says it on page 84 in the big book, doesn't he? Once you finish the 9th step, he says, we've entered the world of the spirit. We've come out of the world of self. We've entered the world of the spirit. We are placed in a position of neutrality. I'm quoting. These are not paraphrases. Page 84. We are placed in a position of neutrality with regard to our addiction, but, and now I am adding my own paraphrase, we're not cured of our unmanageability, and we have a daily reprieve of our unmanageability, the spiritual malady, the cancer of the soul. I believe it was in Buddhist literature that I read this summary of what humans need in order to manifest their best self. Let's have the Buddhist talk. Their higher self, their higher consciousness. We need a path. We need a teacher. And we need a community. See, the community is our 12-step fellowship, whatever that is for us. And that's where the traditions then are the principles. The steps are the principles for the individual reformation, recovery, enlightenment, spiritual awakening. And the traditions are the principles that will have the same impact as the steps do in the deflation of the ego at the individual. The traditions have, as Bill says, the impact of the deflation of the ego of the group. Just human nature. He is a brilliant study of human nature. And then he takes it to the concepts, which are 12 principles. Immutable, non-negotiable. Principles of reality, like gravity. Immutable, non-negotiable. How to sustain the organizational system that supports the groups that support the individual. You see, the going forward, the steps lead to the traditions, lead to the concepts. But looking backwards, the organizational system itself needs to be maintained based on these spiritual principles. So in the process, I've suggested prayer, that set-aside prayer, some form of set-aside prayer for everything. It's how I start my day. Holy Spirit, release me from up till now. Detach me from after now. And allow me to be fully present in the now. That's one I can remember. The others I don't. They're all on cards or in writing, and they change based on the circumstances, as I did for today's work with the concepts. There's been some assignments of reading. The primary one is the Concepts Illustrated. It's just simple but straightforward, a wonderful distillation for us who are doing a very quick, more or less superficial study of the concepts and discussion. If you want to have and or read samples from the concepts manual, that's a wonderful document. I read it and studied it in workshops probably 25 years ago, but I'm not doing that this year. I'm doing sort of a refresher with the illustration and with the checklists. The GSO has produced checklists. It's on my website if you don't have it. A lot of material for supporting this workshop is on my website, which I took from the AA website, the GSO website. A very robust website. If you haven't visited, I recommend it. How to organize and a structure and how to make suggestions for communication. Authority and responsibility. Those are the two key words here for the concepts. Ultimate responsibility, ultimate authority. This is concept one, and all of the others flow from that. Delegated responsibility. It's very an unusual group. It's contrary to any other group you'll come across, quite frankly. It's an upside down triangle. That's what they call it, where the point of the triangle is at the bottom And the base of the triangle is at the top, and the base are the individuals in the fellowship. Because the group conscience and the individual relationship with God and the group's relationship with group conscience are the sources of suggestions and operations. And that responsibility and that authority is then delegated through a mechanism that's just brilliant, to the point where the General Service Conference meets once a year, I believe it is, and has representatives through a system of, again, delegation, to review the workings of the fellowship and the questions that need to be asked and the literature that needs to be produced. I'm assuming that you reflected on your readings. If you've done some, at least you're here to reflect on the conversations about the readings and asking questions and sharing comments and sharing your experience. That's the whole point of this. Perhaps you did some writing that prepared you for this discussion. One of the keys to my recovery in the step work was this man who I engaged at 4 years of sobriety. I believe I talked about it at the beginning of my opening here. And he said to me, Herb, you have a lot of information. Look at my hands. You have a lot of information, but you have very little transformation. You have a lot of knowledge, impressive amount of knowledge, but you haven't changed because your knowledge didn't get filtered through your heart, through your feet to having an experience. And that's the whole point of that set-aside attitude, number one, that is expressed in a set-aside prayer. So that the information that we get gets filtered through our heart, our behavior, our feet, and gives us an experience of change. You've probably heard me talk a lot about, you heard certainly Melissa talk about the schedule for emotional sobriety. It's probably one of the major themes of the last 20 years for myself and Dr. Alan Berger is a clinical psychologist. We're agreed, he and I have agreed to do quarterly workshops on emotional sobriety. I've coined the term spiritual sobriety. Emotional sobriety is really step 10. That's the primary tool of emotional sobriety. I do believe that spiritual sobriety, if it's even a word that you want to use, includes steps 11 and 12. My relationship with power, step 11, and my relationship in service to people. But it may not be necessary. I would be quite satisfied with emotional sobriety as encompassing 10, 11, and 12. Bill calls it our way of life, our way of living. He says, we are not cured, we have a daily reprieve. He points out in pages 35 to 37 in Jim's story, the man who put a little whiskey in his milk, that he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Well, he doesn't tell us there what that means. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. But on page 14, he does tell us that in a different context. Take a look at Jim's story. It's a powerful story about relapse, about the obsession taking possession of him, despite him having a spiritual awakening and the promises manifesting, page 35, 36. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Page 37, he talks about insanity. He literally went to the insane asylum. The insanity was that he picked up a drink, thinking that it would be different this time. He had a little whiskey with his milk, and he had already had a sandwich, which he had done before, and went to the nut house. before, but he didn't remember to remember. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Doesn't tell us what that means, but on page 14, he does in his own story. For if an alcoholic fails to enlarge, I am quoting now, if an alcoholic fails to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, that's the connection. Enlarging our spiritual life. In step 11, it says we improve our conscious contact. Improve our conscious contact in step 11 through our daily practice of meditation. We enlarge our spiritual life. See, there's a diagonal and a horizontal connotation to that. Diagonal meaning up and down. That relationship of head in the clouds. Horizontal, that relationship of walking the path. Improving, vertical. Enlarging, horizontal. Just insights that might help you understand and apply. And as I gave in the initial meditation from the language of the heart, this is about carrying the message. We get the message in the steps. We sustain the message and carry it in the groups. But what sustains the groups? The concepts, the organizational structure. There's 100 paid employees. That's not the fellowship. That's the organization that supports the fellowship. Carry the message. Bill says on page 89 in chapter 7, I'm quoting again, nothing will so much ensure immunity. Oh my God, we're so sensitive today to that word. Immunization. I mean, we've just come out of, or still processing coming out of a pandemic for 2 years. Killed millions of people around the world. We're very sensitive to immunization. Bill uses, nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with others. Carrying the message is our immunization. Enlarging our spiritual life is enlarging that shield that protects us from the obsession. My interpretation, page 84, we're not cured, we have a daily reprieve. That daily reprieve is the spiritual shield of finishing the first 9 steps and having an effective relationship with power. Practicing principles in all our affairs gets very little attention. The 12 steps are principles. The 12 traditions are principles. The 12 concepts are principles. We have 36 principles. In the big book, chapter 8 is about our significant relationship. It's entitled To the Wives. Today it would have a different title. Read it and look for the principles. The Family Afterwards, chapter 9. Read it, find the principles. To the Employer, Principles at Work. Then a very poetic title for chapter 11, A Vision for You. But when you read it, it's really about principles in your community and in your fellowship. Principles. These are the underlying sources of reality. A very, I think, graphic example is gravity. It's a basic law of physics, a principle of physics of the material world. Material objects fall to rest. All right. Gravity, that's the principle, at least in the Earth's atmosphere. And it doesn't matter what you want, think, or know, or feel. It's immutable and non-negotiable. Heavy things fall to a resting place. The law of gravity. Well, there are spiritual principles that are revealed to us in the 12-step process. There are spiritual principles of group behavior. There are spiritual principles that allow an organization to sustain both the groups and the individuals. Immutable, non-negotiable principles. That's what these concepts are. You've heard me say, because I got it from Dr. Berger, who got it from Nathaniel Brandon, the psychologist, nobody's coming. I am the one I am waiting for. Nobody's coming was over this psychologist's office. Nobody's coming. And my conclusion in meditation was, I am the one I'm waiting for. That's what I discovered in the steps. I am the one I am waiting for. But I also transferred that into this particular context. Who is coming to help them? We are the one they are waiting for. If you read the early history of AA, Roland Hazard, talking to Carl Jung, was told that he was condemned to die unless he found a spiritual experience. He found it in the Osher group, and he carried it to Ebby. Ebby carried it to Bill. Bill carried it to Bob. Bob and Bill carried it to Bill Dotson, the third one. And the whole concept is proactivity. They reached out having found the truth. They reached out to deliver the message. You can change if you do certain things. You can get free of your addiction, at the very least, is the promise, placed in a position of neutrality. But you can get free of life's suffering, of your unmanageability, of your ego-centeredness, your self-centeredness. Self will run riot. Extreme examples of self will run riot. And there's a solution to unmanageability, to find a power and to foster that power and to improve that conscious contact with power and to enlarge that light in you that is not you, that is available to you, that you can become a lantern to shine on a path to others. It's a great image, the lantern. We are the one they are waiting for. So join me in this prayer, and then we'll proceed with our conversation about the concepts. And I hope that warm-up was helpful. This, of course, is the 7-step prayer, but I've modified it. Prayer is not about words. Prayer is about intention. I call the 7-step prayer, certainly in this context, a healing prayer. My healing, and I bring healing to others when I carry the message to them. They may not hear it, or they may hear it in a different way. My job is to carry the message. My job is the effort, and the results are none of my business. Please join me, my Creator. I am now willing that you should have all of me, healthy and unhealthy. I pray that you now remove from me every single self-centered inclination and behavior that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and others, especially those in any 12-step fellowship. Grant me knowledge and power to go out from here to be in alignment with reality as it really is. Amen. That's a prayer that's very packed with some experiences that I've had with the step process itself. To be in alignment with reality. That's emotional sobriety. To be in alignment with reality. That's serenity. All right. So let's talk about concept 1. Ultimate responsibility and authority. I have the image of an organism, Alcoholics Anonymous, as an integrated, holistic organism. It's like a live body. Each one of us has a head and ears on the head and eyes in the head and hands and arms and legs and feet. They're all different, but they all work together to maintain the survival of and activity of the body. The body Alcoholics Anonymous, or the body Al-Anon, whatever your 12-step fellowship is, think of it as an organism, and there's a life flow in it, in the organism, like there's a life flow in me. In 20 years, I'll be laid out. My body will be there and it'll look like me, but it won't be me because I won't be there. What is that life force that is me? Lots of theories on it, but that's the image that I have and the metaphor that I have for the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, the fellowship of Al-Anon, the fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous. This organismic whole that has a life force that is fostered through these principles: responsibility and authority. Very, very related to tradition too, as I see it, that group conscience, that's the life force of the fellowship. And when one or two are gathered, when they speak and they agree on something or they disagree, all right, that's the group conscience speaking. That is the spirit of light, the spirit of God, the spirit of power. God as I don't understand it is a much better phrase, I think. But there's a flow that gives unity to the organism, the fellowship. There's a flow that gives unity to the structure that is the system that supports the unity and supports the groups. That upside down triangle. It's the individuals in the organization that form the group conscience that is delegated to a representative, that is delegated to a representative, that is delegated to a person who goes to the General Service Conference, not to represent literally the opinions of the group, but to be an independent representative, a trusted servant, not a trusted messenger. That was one of the biggest points of concept one, I believe. A trusted servant, not a trusted or a sent messenger. So if you have comments on or understanding of or experience with or questions about concept one, I don't pretend to know as much about or have experience about the concepts as I do the traditions, and certainly not the steps, where I do believe I'm rather an expert in that. Those are the books that Melissa talked about. They're all on the steps. But I wanted to facilitate this discussion. So I'm really counting on each one of you to bring your questions. There's no silly question. There's just, honest questions that you want to know and or experiences that you want to share or information that you have that would be helpful because you actually have been involved in the service structure. I have not been involved in the service structure. So if you have.
I find it really interesting that how you describe this as instructions for how to run a spiritual organization.
Non-profit organization, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wrote that down because it really didn't occur to me that, oh yeah, and also that I'm getting ahead here on step one because I'm really looking at step three, and I found step three interesting, but I just want to comment that
You mean concept one or three?
Oh, concept three,
Yeah.
pardon me.
Yeah.
concept three, in that when you are sending a delegate to a conference, you're really delegating authority to that person in a very large way.
Yeah, 100% actually.
100% actually, because of this right to decide
Yeah.
thing that's stressed in
Yeah.
three. And I was wondering if you had any other comments on that before we get to concept three.
Well, as I mentioned, but thanks for your question. The term that really impressed me was we're not sending. We are sending a delegate. We are not sending a messenger.
Right.
And that said it all. Oh,
yeah, it really does.
We're going to trust this person's common sense and knowledge and good heart to process what's going on and not be voting based on the group's vote that they left, but based on their processing of the information at the present time in the Spirit of God.
Well, now I know it's safe for me to raise my hand and say, I'll be a delegate, because everybody's going to go, no, you won't.
Well, in the group conscience is the sacred. It's that again, going back to the total body as a independent organism with a lot of moving parts, but there's a life force that informs it. This is the God force that we're talking about here in terms of the group conscience. And there's a whole lot of trust and faith in that whole process.
Yeah, it's interesting because at the beginning of the Concepts Illustrated, it mentions that steps 3, 4, and 5, and then I believe 9 and 12 deal with spirituality. And when you look at step 3, or concept 3, pardon me, at first it really doesn't seem that way. It's like just explaining that you're sending a delegate, and that in rare cases, maybe the next level up, I guess there's only 2 levels of conferences, like World Conference and then Area Conference, but it is possible, and it's warned against, that the World Conference might tell the Area Conference, or the Area Conference might tell a delegate, no, this is the way it's going to be. So say we, the board of the Area Conference. And Bill just describes, oh, well, you know what you got now? You've got civil service. So people are going to get angry, they're going to quit, or they're just going to develop a bad attitude and hunker down and stay there and not be effective anymore. So so when I looked at that, I said, you know what, that really is spiritual in nature. It really is. It's not just psychological.
I agree 100%. And what we mean by spirit is that there's a force that is a mystery that permeates the organization, because it permeates the individuals, and it's much bigger than the individual, and it's much bigger than the organization, and we can trust it. Now, that sounds like a lot of blah, 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 gobbledygook and new age stuff. And yet that's exactly where we're at.
Not to me, man. I'm step 4, and I'm realizing that when I get to step 6, I've got to be able to say, take all of me, because you're going to sort the stuff out. Look, I found all these bad things, but you know what? Who am I to judge? Myself. Here I was spending time judging other people, and then I turn around, I'm like, I'm not even qualified to figure out what's good and bad about me.
Right.
For crying out loud. Anyway, I digress, so I will.
No, thanks very much. And I did overlook reading the concept, which I wanted to do. The short form, I'll read that for right now. Final responsibility and ultimate authority for AA World Services should always reside in the collective conscience of our whole fellowship. That I've been emphasizing that with some metaphors and with some words.
So I'm looking at, I'm assuming probably that the AA tradition 2 is, I mean, I'm in Overeaters Anonymous. We took our traditions from AA. So I'm assuming it's pretty much the same. And it says that the ultimate authority in tradition 2 is a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience.
Yep.
And concept 1, we're talking about ultimate authority as well. So
Yep.
could you talk a little bit more about those two? You said that traditions 2 sort of seemed to you like it connected with concept 1.
Yes, I did say that because it's about the group conscience. That is the direction that is suggested by the body of delegated people. That's why the principle here in the concept is responsibility and authority. That's the principle that comes from the belief that the life force underneath the organization is in fact the spirit, whatever you want to call that, spirit with a capital S. And then concepts 2 through 12 are all delegated from that. And so it's a kind of a flip from tradition 2 to concept 1. So that's the relationship that at least I see with it. I'm not sure that answered your question, but that's where in the illustrated document, it talks about the upside down triangle, if you have that in front of you.
Right, the inverted triangle. Yeah.
Inverted, that's the word. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. That gives me, I don't mean to pun this, but food for thought.
Well, I love humor. It's my own spiritual director said, humor, especially about yourself, is a sign of authentic spirituality.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was I actually sat down and read the long version of the concepts, and I really, I just really had a lot of appreciation for Bill and his insight as to what could happen, what could have happened if he didn't do that, if he didn't put together the conference and the whole idea that he started letting go of his authority and people looking to him, and
let me stop you right there, because that's a really good point for us to see as sort of the seed that gave Bill the idea. Bob died
right
in 1950. And Bill was very conscious then of the mortality of the 2 leaders that were the arbiter of everything.
right
So he got the idea, we need to have a system, because I'm going to die, that will hold this thing together. That's where he came up with the traditions at the beginning, all right, because he saw the mortality of Bob in the mid-40s. And then his own mortality was very clear to him as necessary to have tools or systems in place that would supersede individuals.
right
That would be an organization, a community of people that would be the leadership based on the input from the members at almost at a direct level. Now, this is as direct as, of course, it can be, but go ahead. So I just wanted to make everybody aware that the traditions and the concepts were put together because of Bill's awareness of his own and Dr. Bob's mortality.
Yeah, and it's like how things could have been so much different if he hadn't done that. It's like I and then looking at the concept, just the way it's worded, it says that world services should always reside in the collective conscience of our whole fellowship.
Right.
The Al-Anon version, Al-Anon put together their concepts a number of years later, and it reads, the ultimate responsibility and authority for Al-Anon World Services belongs to the Al-Anon groups. And that's really, I think, simplifying it, like saying it more in a simplified form, but the same thing, and I think, on the other hand, when you look at what it's saying, the collective conscious of our whole fellowship, the whole fellowship involves individuals, it's like the groups for the World Service, for the authority for Al-Anon World Service belong to the Al-Anon groups. That kind of, I don't know, that the difference in verbiage was kind of interesting. But one of the things that it said in the Al-Anon concept, the history of it, it says it's hoped that these 12 concepts will be a welcome document for the use of our trustees, the World Service Office, and the members of the conference, and that the document will prove to be a reliable working guide in years to come. And the thing is that this guide, the concepts are not only just to be applied to the conference or the trustees or World Service Office. It's also guides for the intergroup, and they're talking about principles. And one of the things that I was kind of as you guys were talking, I was thinking about the trusted services, our leaders are but trusted service, they do not govern. This implies that the groups are to be the final authority, that our leaders are to be entrusted with delegated responsibilities only. And talking about, the responsibility of like a delegate or someone to, in service, a group rep or whatever, they have a responsibility to go with the group conscience, but there's some times where, like they're in a business meeting where something will come up and the group wasn't aware of it or whatever. And, I've been to assembly meetings where, where people have gone up and they said, well, we weren't told about this. We didn't talk to our group about this or whatever, and it's like, if every little single thing we had to talk to our group about, we'd never accomplish anything,
Right. You really bogged down.
Yeah. And as it is, we go slow, it's
Very
like
slow. That's that's the part I couldn't participate in.
yeah, I mean, it's really, it can be really frustrating sometimes, but on the other hand, things work out the way they're supposed to. But I just wanted to bring that up as far as the, because I've seen that so many times over the years at different service functions where someone's new, especially, and it's like to talk to them about, hey, you are a trusted servant, and that doesn't mean that you go off and do what you want to do, but you also listen in your meetings and hear the pros and cons of what people have said in your meetings, so that then when you go and things might change, you have a better understanding of how you can, exercise your vote or your
right your comments, and it really the underlying assumption, and I'm hearing it as you're speaking actually in a way that I hadn't heard it before in myself, and that is it's incumbent on these delegates at the various levels to have a pretty vibrant spiritual life, so that in fact they are trusted servants and not politicians. Yeah.
And the thing is that what I've found is that when we've elected in Southern California, when we've done the elections of the delegates, not just anybody stands to do that.
Right.
It's like they've usually been, for my experience, they've been around for a while to be able to
Right. They're experienced.
yeah. And then even still, even when there's, I've seen it where they've had, a tie on who to,
Sure.
and then they put it in the hat to pull it because they know that both
Right.
of those people are well experienced to be able
Qualified,
to at
right.
that point.
Right. I want to remind us also that there is that checklist. We're not going to go through it line by line, but it prompts some wonderful questions about active participation at your local group level. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here about that kind of consciousness, but it's really about making sure that your group in some fashion is responsible and is acting responsibly within the fellowship. As the last bullet point says, to ensure the democracy of our fellowship. So there's an inherent responsibility for us. I'm not going to volunteer to be in the service structure, but I can make sure that there are people in my group that are at least at some level participating in that service structure.
Hi, Herb. Hi, everybody. So yeah, I was doing some reading on this morning, and I took it into meditation, and it's really interesting. So yeah, I read that the principal's responsibility and to have faith in the process. This is a process, and there's a uniformity that needs to be kind of enforced. And I read that in reading the history as well, that it was created for the uniformity of the literature and publications, and helping groups get started is another important facet. So there was like carrying the message, like you said, that the group is responsible to carry the message in the fellowship. And then, so, and something else I read was to take service, do not take service because you want to feel important or change the group or control the group. Do it because it's the key to, it's of the importance of service and recovery, because service gives us our purpose and our drive to get out of bed. Like
right.
that. And so, yeah, so I took it in and reading about like this concept of trying to control others as an Al-Anon. And also I'm a time drunk. I'm an under earner. I have trouble with how I invest my time. And as an Al-Anon, I think I like to control the time of others, or think I have influence over the time of others. And so, where am I trying to manipulate friends or family? I don't manipulate their time, and it's not mine to govern. So I just remembered, I'm the arbiter of no one's conduct. I'm the arbiter of no one's time,
Yeah.
And so in this like group kind of family friends dynamic, where am I thinking about the unity, the kind of group conscience that comes out of things, and not doing things because I feel like I should, but because it's part of the principles of my life, of like how I live, so that's kind of what came through this morning for me.
Yeah, and one of the phrases there that I like, just because it had a nice sound to it, and you used one part of it, you said uniformity, but it said, but not conformity.
Yes.
That was like, okay, because humans have a tendency to go along to get along. And that's not what this is about. It's uniformity, but not conformity. It's about being conscious and staying active and having an opinion. Having
the balance.
There.
The balance. I've got to remember the balance in everything,
Right.
Because that's where, and I'm actually just thinking now, that's where my nightly 11th step comes in, like, is making sure I've been in balance through the day.
Well, and,
Was I thinking of myself most of the time? Was I in service to others, being in the flow of life, that balance aspect.
right. And that's where I made the opening comments about emotional sobriety, connecting it to spiritual sobriety. Step 10 clearly is about balance, but so is 11 and 12. 11 meaning being conscious and improving that, and 12 operating on principles and improving that. So both emotional and spiritual sobriety, that whole way of living, 10, 11, and 12, that's our invitation. And that's our program for living. As you heard me say in the steps 1 through 9, that's the program of recovery, 1 through 9. But then in the world of spirit, 10, 11, and 12, that's the program of living. That's the program that's the antidote to unmanageability. Yeah.
I am a member of a fellowship and I have only attended phone meetings. There are not local meetings here. And I haven't started a local meeting. And I know that I could, but that is, as you say, a subject for another day. So I am working hard with these, as I have been working with the traditions. I'm working hard to see how do they apply to my life with my family and with close friends. I don't have an answer for any of them. It feels, when I read the big book or when I studied it with you, I can see exactly how it applies to my particular form of suffering and my particular addiction. It's not hard for me to translate it all. This is very difficult to find, for me, to find what's the principle underneath the concept, which maybe what those are, and how do I work with it now that I have some awareness of the spiritual solution, which is growing, and as you say, a daily reprieve. How can I apply this new logic, this new way to my on the ground world?
Yeah. And that would be a wonderful challenge for us today to be translating it into personal application. I hadn't even introduced that aspect as I did with the traditions. I said when we started talking about the traditions, yes, it's about the group behavior, but it's really powerful when you apply the traditions to your personal life. And there's lots of literature or comments about doing that, but I'm not familiar with any comments or literature on applying the concepts to our personal life. So that's probably something that people could imagine themselves in their own meditation, as well as in this conversation. If you have some thoughts, any of the people who want to share on the application of each of these. Clearly, in concept 1, authority and responsibility are principles. So how does that impact me as an individual? Do I assume appropriate responsibility? Do I assume appropriate authority? Appropriate, as Ashley was just saying, in terms of balance. Yeah, so that's just a question that is prompted by your observation of making it practical to our personal lives. And so that's a source of then a question in a meditation, quite frankly. I don't have an answer because I haven't done that.
So that's great. I mean, that was a huge helpful piece that you just gave me. Do I assume appropriate authority and responsibility? So do you have a thought like that on concept 2 also, or do you want to wait till you get to concept 2?
We're just going to transition that.
I think I brought this up last time,
No.
but this is from Al-Anon groups. It's called Reaching for Personal Freedom.
Yep.
It does have some examples of how you can use the concepts in a personal way.
Great.
So, for instance, under concept 1, it says, and it's talking about the family of the alcoholic. It says many alcoholic families have little or no experience with shared responsibility and balanced authority. So we're talking about the balance, right? And
Yep.
And I think for me, I also was married to an alcoholic. That for me, I took on. I was the work. I did all the work, the job stuff. I came home and I made the food. I did all. I cleaned the house. I did it all, and I took too much responsibility. I also, the other thing I did, which was not a good thing. I mean, none of this was really good, but specifically, I would, when my husband was working, and that didn't happen real often, but when he was working and he was drinking and couldn't get into work, I would call.
Yeah, of
So
course.
I'm taking responsibility that is not my own.
Yeah.
So I think some of these things in this book are really, really good. They bring it into for me, it was helpful because they brought it into my personal life, and then I could see it in a broader sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the whole point. Or I can see it in a broader sense, and then I bring it into my personal life. It works both ways.
Mhm, mhm.
No, that's wonderful. And I do remember I made a note of it. I didn't follow up on it. So I'm so glad that you brought it up again, because I made another note. We'll see what I do with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Herb.
Thanks very much, Sarah. That's great. All right. So let's take, let's target 3 to 5 minutes, and probably it'll be 5 minutes right now by my clock. It's 11:20, so I'll be back at 11:25 for sure, maybe a little earlier. And we'll pick it up on concepts 2 and 3 and probably go till noon. Thank you. Well, I'm back and ready to continue. So let's take a look at concept 2, short form. You have those worksheets that I had suggested that you download and have in a binder. At least that's my style, hard copy. It may not be yours, but it has both the short and the long form. And in the spirit of what Shar had suggested, it has some questions about its application to us individually. We haven't explored that dimension in the conversation on the first one, other than after Shar's share. And I'd like to recommend that you incorporate that into your thinking, certainly, but if you have something to share, that if you have a specific experience with or suggestion for the personal application, that would be wonderful also. Short form, the General Service Conference of AA has become, for nearly every practical purpose, the active voice and the effective conscience of our whole society in its world affairs. The General Service Conference. All that means is the annual conference, I think it lasts a week. Delegates from each of the areas and groups come together with the authority and the responsibility, representing, not carrying the message of the group, but carrying the responsibility and authority of the group conscience. So it's really the conference itself that sustains the direction of the fellowship. Not sure I have much more to say on it. Gathering of the groups worldwide. I'm not quite sure how that functions. I know that the annual meeting is North America, United States, and Canada. It may have groups from the other countries, but I'm actually not sure whether they might have their own General Service Conference which coordinates. I'm not sure of that. It's the advisory voice of the group conscience. It's in effect the actual leadership in that inverted triangle. And then some of that, of course, those conference decisions and directions and guidelines gets actually delegated to the 100 employees of the General Service Office, including the grapevine, to implement in a practical way. Anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions about concept 2? The illustrated doesn't have a lot of concrete information about it. It merely indicates what I just summarized. The checklist from the General Service Office again confirms it's the active voice, the General Service Conference, the active voice and the effective conscience. And it just challenges us, are we aware of the General Service Conference itself and the report? I'm not. I don't read those reports. Oh my God, they're so large. I guess it would be very helpful if we had a highlights. And that's the function of the GSR and the DCM, it says here, to bring those highlights. I'm not aware in my 38 years of attendance at meetings on a regular basis that there's ever been much reporting back to the groups about what's going on, other than perhaps a little controversy and or a little gossip, but nothing that's actually been quite constructive in the sense of suggestions and actions to follow up. Oh, and then the other bullet point in that checklist is about the tradition 7, we get some information about that in terms of making contributions in the 7th tradition. And of course, that's a very neglected and misunderstood area, not to bring it up in terms of the traditions in any great length, but one of my teachers in the traditions suggested that to keep it inflation adjusted, that is my contribution to the basket on a weekly basis, I go to meetings, to keep it inflation adjusted, put in the basket the current price of a drink. I thought it was brilliant. Because of course, the cost of a glass of wine in 1950 and the cost of a glass of wine in 2022, not that I actually know about that, but I've been around where people, and I've had to pay the bill, have ordered a glass of wine, and right now it's between $12 and $15. I mean, this is bar wine. It's not anything special. It's not a bottle. It's just a glass. And so I've adjusted my contribution based on my personal ability to pay, and also to recognize that I want to support both my meeting and the general service office.
Yes, I wanted to read the Al-Anon version of it because I think it kind of explains it a little bit better.
Explain what?
For me.
Concept 2?
Yes, concept 2.
Wonderful.
The Al-Anon family groups have delegated complete administrative and operational authority to their conference and its service arms. And I think that's something that it's kind of, you glean from the AA version, but and you said it, that, you know, the conference does things and then delegates things to the service arms or whatever, the office and stuff like that. But also, as far as the conference, you know, I know in Al-Anon, we have a conference as well. And every year they put out a conference summary. And actually, I had copies of them for many, many years in the closet out there. And I finally got rid of some of them or whatever. But what I like about those conference summaries is that they have an ask it basket, and they ask, you know, where people can ask certain questions and stuff. The delegates have gotten questions from the different groups or whoever, and then they really answer them at length. And what I've done in the past, when an issue has come up, I've gone back to those ask it basket questions to see the history of how things evolved and things like that. And you know, it's interesting because the same questions come up over and over again over the years. It's like, and one of them is like, you know, can you reference the big book in an Al-Anon meeting? You know, that kind of stuff. And
what was the answer?
No. Well, I mean, you can reference it, but you can't read it, you know, whatever. Like it's outside literature, you know, but yeah, it's really
that's probably fairly controversial, at least generally, maybe not in Al-Anon, you know.
Yeah, but anyway, it's I think those conference summaries are good.
You know, that's Tennis. I so appreciate your bringing that to my attention, because quite frankly, I didn't know that there was a conference summary, because I've never been that interested or paid attention.
Yeah, and I don't know if they do an AA, but I'm assuming.
I'm sure they do. Yeah, I'm sure they do. Yeah.
And like I said, if something comes up and you're, you know, I know recently in the last few years there was a couple of issues that came up where I did a lot of research and stuff, and it's like I referenced those conference summaries also, you know, and so it's real. And plus you kind of, you know, even on the Al-Anon website, the main website, they have I didn't know until maybe a couple of years ago that they actually you know, publish on the website. They publish you know, like different trustee reports and stuff like that. And I don't know, I I find that stuff interesting,
Yeah. Well, I think once you get some traction in recovery, I don't know whether that's 1 year or 5 years or 10 years, whatever, it's probably incumbent on the individual to be responsible to know, at least know what's going on in the biggest and broadest of senses. And that's what you're bringing to my attention. Yeah, that's excellent. And it probably is on the website. The conference summary might be even on the website or accessible in some fashion. Yeah.
I'm just beginning to understand this stuff.
Yeah.
And so the more I can talk about it, I guess the more I can think about it, the more I understand. So
Yes.
concept 1 kind of, for me, segues into concept 2. So yeah. So I'm first of all, in concept 1, I want all the authority. I don't know how to delegate the authority. I don't know how to do these things.
I'm sure that's true.
So in concept 2, it's telling me let loose. I can delegate to some people. I don't have to do this all on my own.
Right.
So that's kind of a nice, way of going from one to the next. If I can see that as I go through,
Yeah.
it makes it, in my head, it makes it so much easier.
Yeah.
I am not legalistic. I do not understand legal stuff. This seems more legal than the steps and the traditions.
It is. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. But anyway, I do like the transition that I've got hold of all this stuff. And I don't know how to delegate authority. And then in concept 2, it
Right.
tells me I can give that authority to
Right.
to the conference,
Yeah.
and be okay. I mean, I can sit back now and I don't have to do it all.
Yeah. And I don't want to oversimplify. Thank you for those comments. I don't want to oversimplify, but going back to the image that I attempted to communicate at the very beginning about I have an entire body. The job of my eyes is to see.
Mm-hmm.
The job of my brain is to think. The job of my hands is activity, whatever, and of my feet, movement. And so that's delegated. That's delegated to the appropriate function. And so at least I'm staying with that to incorporate what you just said, that in the body of the fellowship, we delegate some volunteer things, but we also have some paid people who have a responsibility because we have an organization that needs to sustain the fellowship, printing literature and et cetera, translating and all of the answering questions, that without which the groups would be stranded. So yeah, good image. And so I hope that helps.
Hi, Herb. Hi, everybody. So yeah, I was intergroup representative, not group representative, but for intergroup for Al-Anon. Anyway, a year ago or 2 years ago, time's so messed up for me. Both because of my natural inclination and the pandemic. I'll give myself a break there. So we had, we were voting on new board of directors members. And so we were given I got to hear at the meeting all about the speech from each of these people. And then it was my responsibility to take it to the group and share that information. And then the group, so that's kind of like concept 1. I'd bring the issue to the group. And then the way I did it is I set up a voting tab so that I could, I read the written statements from each of the people, and then we had a vote. And then so one of the questions I got asked after the vote was, well, if we've delegated responsibility to you, don't you have the ultimate authority? Why are you even asking us? What's the point of that? And I said, well, because it's my responsibility to represent the group conscience, and took that. And then it's also my responsibility to be the representative of the group and make sure my voice is heard in the way in which I vote. So I don't have to necessarily like whatever happened in the group. I bring that back, and then it's about teamwork. Like concept 2 is about teamwork, and something else that I was looking at, when this issue came up, I did a lot of Al-Anon reading on it. And it really freed me, actually, honestly, as a representative, because there were 3 different members and I had my own personal opinion, but it was really freeing to get the group opinion. And it says, by delegating authority, no one volunteer becomes overly burdened or responsible. And the members in the group are the policy members for the group. The group representatives in my area are the policy now I'm switching to world service, but the members in a group are the policy members for that group. The group representatives in my area are the policy makers for my area, and the conference members, which delegates the trustees, and a few WSO staff are the policy makers for the worldwide Al-Anon.
Yeah, it's a tiered sense of responsibility with delegated responsibility and authority. And one of the notes I have that you reminded me of in concept 2 is that Al-Anon actually has the function of a service sponsor, which is interesting because AA does not have, at least formally, as I understand it, does not have that concept. I think it's a great idea. I had a step sponsor. Then I had a tradition sponsor. That's something I made up because I wanted to learn the traditions, and there was a guy in my area who was a real mechanic with it. So I went through the traditions with him in the same way I went through the steps with my step sponsor. But I never heard of the service sponsor, which I think it's just a brilliant concept.
Yeah, there's a whole pamphlet on it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. For people who are in fact interested in or actually want to get active in the organizational structure, I think it would be brilliant to have somebody who has experience that would be your mentor, teacher, and guide. Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say that a few years ago, I experienced a situation where I was doing a service position where my personal sponsor, I was having a really hard time because there were times where she was trying to convince me to do certain things, and we were butting heads. And at that point in time, I actually was going to give up the commitment, and I ended up instead calling a woman who I had heard who had had a similar commitment. And I called her with basically hoping that she would, help me to let go of that commitment. And we talked for over an hour. And by the end of that hour, I ended up asking her to be my service sponsor. And because of that, I was able to keep that commitment and also keep that my personal sponsor, because I was at a point where, and my personal sponsor was like backed off after that when I told her, I have this is what happened. And so, I really have a hard time with some of these positions that we have, and when we have sponsors, because like, when do you make a decision by yourself and based on what you've learned in the program and and how responsible you are as an individual, and when do you reach out to your personal sponsor? It's really, sometimes it can be really, really hard. And I've seen it on boards where I've been on boards where people are like, well, I have to talk to my sponsor about this before I make, and it's like, well, it's like you're on a board and you have to talk to your sponsor first. It's like, I have a hard time with that, so.
Well, again, isn't that the whole bullseye on emotional sobriety?
Yeah.
Is learning that balance between independence and interdependence. And that's something we learn over time by making mistakes.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're too codependent and not self-confident. Other times we're overconfident and incorrect and ignorant. And no, seriously, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when we make a mistake, we don't get it. We don't allow the mistake to name us. We go, oh, that's a mistake. I learned from that. Then I can talk to somebody and or not and learn from that and then navigate it more gracefully over time. It's about getting that balance. And I think we're always growing.
Yeah.
If we're willing to take the risk of independent thought, but also the humility and vulnerability to have feedback that will be constructive.
Right. And then to deal with other people who are on different levels, and it's a little much sometimes. That's why, personally, I've recently, in the last year or so, I've taken a step back from service beyond the group level. But actually some of these questions have gotten me thinking, well, maybe I might be willing to try something again soon, but I'm not saying for sure.
Right. No. Again, that's and that's the balance between prayer and inspiration and sponsorship and using them as a sounding board. The reason I have a sponsor is not as a parent, but as a sounding board, somebody who has more experience than I do that will tell me the truth and risk hurting my feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not make my decisions for me.
Oh, no. That's that parent thing. Yeah, no.
Right.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you.
Concept 3. To ensure effective leadership, we should endow each element of AA or your respective fellowship, the conference, the General Service Board, and its service corporations, staff, committees, and executives with a traditional right of decision. That's a very technical term. It's even in quotes, the right of decision. And that means that the group has delegated to me just what Tanis was saying, the responsibility, and Ashley was saying, the responsibility to get some feedback, to get some information, but then I'm responsible not to represent the group, but to be a person who makes a decision based on the current circumstances and information, independent of what perhaps the group has in fact expressed as an interest, because you have a response. Each person has the responsibility at that time to adjust to the information that they've been presented. Respecting the group, but really functioning in the milieu of the present moment. As the comment I have on my notes is a servant of the whole group, not just of my group. Let me see here. Yeah, the right of decision versus being a messenger of the group. I'm a trusted servant of the group. It requires a mutual trust of God, of course, that power, that force that inspires the individual, the group, and the entire fellowship, and to mutual trust of the fellowship and of each other. Servant leadership, that's a very incredibly good concept. In fact, regular business, commercial business, has begun to adopt some aspect of servant leadership because they found it very effective in helping people maximize their potential. Yeah, representatives were not representatives of our groups. excuse me, we are representatives of our group. We're not messengers of our group. Yeah. So concept 3 in the illustrated, let's see what kind of highlights I made there. You know, I didn't make any highlights, so it didn't actually stand out to me in terms of the checklist. Concept 3. Do we understand the spiritual principle underlying the right of participation? Well, that's a different term than the right of decision. Oops, I'm on the wrong one, sorry. The right of decision. Do I understand what is meant by the right of decision? Do we grant it all levels, or do we instruct? Service versus instruction, I think, is the contrast there. Do we trust our trusted servants, the GSR, the DCM, the area delegate, and the conference itself? So it's really the question, do we trust the group conscience as it's manifested through the delegation and responsibility?
Wow. You know, I was just thinking just before you started talking that puts a lot, not pressure, that's not what I mean. It puts a lot of responsibility on the person who is the delegate.
Huge.
Yeah, a lot of responsibility. So when I first went to World Service, we have a World Service Business Conference once a year. And the first time I went there, what they do is they have a mentor. They have a mentor program where another delegate who's been there and understands all the scope of what's going on is a mentor to someone who's coming there for the first time. So that mentorship setup is a really nice setup because I learned a lot from my mentor. She'd been there.
Tell me about that. That's really intriguing me. I have not heard about this mentorship.
Yeah. So one of the things that I had to put on my when I sent in my application, I had to tell them, was I a first-time delegate or had I been there before? So this first time I checked that I was a first-time delegate. And they call us green dots. I guess because we're green, right? We haven't been there before. And then I'm assigned just anybody who's willing. I mean, I guess they take the pool of willing people and they just assign a willing person to a delegate new.
Yeah.
And for that time period,
yeah.
I sit with her, I ask her questions or him, whichever. I get information. It's like I'm getting, a little,
you're being
I'm going to school. I'm going to school, sort of.
Yeah, well, you're actually being sponsored.
Yes, that's right. It is kind of like a sponsorship.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot through that whole, relationship. It was such a wonderful thing. And then, maybe 2 or 3 years later, I could do the same thing. I was the sponsor and I helped a green dot go through the same thing. So it's a rotating service because you give back what you've so generously been given.
Right.
And I don't know whether that's unique to OA or not. I don't know.
I don't either. Yeah. I mean, it's a brilliant, practical, common sense way of empowering the individual. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I wanted to say in that there was a responsibility. I didn't understand the impact of my going there the first time until I got there and I saw, we do pro and con and discuss different issues. And although I knew, I'd listened to folks in my intergroup, I didn't understand until I asked my, person what my responsibility was. Do I vote the way that the group wanted me to vote, or do I take all this other information that's coming to me, and do I vote globally? That's, to the actual, what I'm hearing now. I'm hearing different things, more things. And she said, of course, globally. Yeah. So that was a really great learning experience. So I just thought I'd pass that on.
Well, that's a practical application of what we were talking about theoretically, because you actually have the experience. And so thank you for taking us through it, because that makes it very concrete for us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hey, Herb, I was so grateful for, so continuing with the example I used, but also my own life. This gave me the right to make mistakes, the right of decisions, the ability to make mistakes.
Mhm.
When I take on a service position, I'm not going to be micromanaged and controlled. And I don't micromanage or control others. I give them the breadth and the width. And especially as an adult child of alcoholic, I was micromanaged. And the first, in Al-Anon, we have this book, Paths to Recovery, that we work the steps, traditions, and concepts in. The very first question of concept 3 is, do I ever ask someone to do a task and then try to direct the details of how it should be done? If so, how should I change this pattern? And then 2, what would give me confidence to decide when to take charge of a job and when to consult with those who might be affected? In what ways am I willing to be responsible for the outcomes of my decisions? And this was huge in the process I just spoke about. Have I shared with my group the process I used as a servant, as a trusted servant, in making an informed decision? And so when I was listening to the 3 people speak about this board of directors, everyone was excellent. We couldn't really go wrong, honestly, but we had changed the service structure of Intergroup to, this was the first year of it. So it was crucial. We had a stacked structure of 1 year, the second, 3-year terms, but we were starting a new stacked structure. So we only had 1 permanent person, but 2 people had in the first year gone on as like volunteers, where they helped. And then there was a 3rd person on the voting list. And it was just really interesting because there were 2 men and a woman. And we're just starting something new. And I really had to think about it as I represented to my group. We have 3 people who started this board of directors, and we can vote all 3 in at staggered terms. So next year, a person can come on for a new 3-year term. And there's also a provision where she can now be the person who watches and is on the board of directors this year. She's just not an official board of director member.
That's brilliant.
And so as a female, it was a really big thing of, do I vote against my sex? It was really, not against, but what are the things? Brought up so many different things. And I thought about the continuity and the not falling apartness of this brand new structure we were trying out.
Right.
So I gave my recommendation to the group. Everyone spoke about it after I read the things. And then I took back, and the vote did come in the recommendation I'd made, but I was prepared to vote on the behalf of what our whole group had kind of spoken about, because all of these issues got thought through. Like, I'm not our group, area had spoken about. All of these issues have been thought through. How can we make sure that the next person isn't brand new? Is there like an apprenticeship kind of, I guess, like you would say, maybe like kind of this mentorship thing?
It's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The more that we can have exposure like that, the more competent and confident people will be.
And then the group has the right of decision to be wrong too. And so we're learning to tie our shoes here. You we'll see what happens.
Yeah. No, that's, again, a wonderful live experience that gives us a sense of what we're talking about from a theory standpoint, in a practical standpoint. And you made it very practical in terms of taking it into your personal life, in terms of your own sense of balance with regard to responsibility. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes, I really found Ashley's, what Ashley had to say very interesting, only because the area, the county that that I'm in, they recently, in the last year, I think implemented a similar thing, but unfortunately, I don't think they went to the groups about it. And I didn't hear anything of it. And I think it was just implemented by certain individuals on the existing board. And I don't think they followed that group conscience. And it kind of irks me a bit. So I like hearing from Ashley about what had happened in her
Yeah,
county.
but Ashley described as a very slow, tedious process,
Yeah,
but
and
it's a
that's-
very effective
Exactly.
process to inform everybody.
right. And I did not see that in our county. And
It's no, your group went the easier, softer way.
yeah, and you know, I wanted to read this, and this is from the Al-Anon third concept, but it's really verbatim what was put in the AA. And it says, this right of decision should never be used as an excuse for failing to render proper reports of all significant actions taken, for exceeding a clearly defined authority, or for repeatedly failing to consult those who are entitled to be consulted before an important decision or action is taken. And I think that's what's happened here, is that you know, we've got possibly one or more bleeding deacons, you know, that are taking it upon themselves to fix the situation in a way that where they're not bothering to consult the groups. And anyway, and it says our entire Al-Anon program rests squarely on the principle of mutual trust. We trust God, we trust Al-Anon, we trust one another. Therefore, we cannot do less than trust our servants in service. The right of decision we offer them is the practical means by which they may act and lead effectively. It's also the symbol of our implicit confidence. And I'm really glad that I'm studying this, because you know, things are just kind of coming into, you know, coming together for me, because
Especially as we talk about it and people offer their practical experience and or interpretations. It really, when we talk about it like this, yes, you're right. It clarifies.
right. And I had done a significant amount of research, and I was aware of what was going on, I think, in the county that Ashley's in. And I even went on the website and looked at their, you know, what they were doing and stuff. And so now in the county I'm in, for this to happen so quickly, I'm like, oh, and I haven't been involved. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know. But on the other hand, you know, I think the pandemic with people being on Zoom and stuff, there's been maybe a tendency to not to be able to do that a little bit more, is to take advantage of a situation where there's not really the full discussion that we had in person.
And yet the opposite should be true.
Yeah.
Because Zoom makes it much more accessible to the general audience.
Right. But that's only if they allow you to speak. And from what I understand, they put limitations on the Zoom participation.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Sure.
Learning
Human beings are wily.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So anyway, I really appreciate Ashley's contribution.
Thank you.
Just a quick thing. Yeah, I just wanted to bring this into my personal life. It's also my responsibility of decision. Like, there's the right of decision, but this event changed my entire life. And yes, because there was also a service position I was in where the group voted against my personal decision. And I had the right of decision to say, this doesn't work for me. I'll give an out. It's against my financial interests. I did it very, very I was very proud of what I did because it didn't feel good, but I knew it was in the group interest and in my personal interest. And as soon as I saw that I've been giving right of decision as an Al-Anon to everybody else in my life but me, because I thought it made me safe, I had no authority over my own life. And this right of decision and the shoelaces example that's in here of it takes you as long as it takes to tie your shoelaces, you're going to mess up. I was like, when I'm receiving guidance from my higher power, I have the right to do the GPS thing and, have the bumpers on the bowling alley and get put back into the middle. I have the right to get in balance. And not only that, do I have the right? I can't escape it. Like, it's going to happen anyway.
That's right.
So it really gave me such levity. I found myself laughing so much more. It's like, you actually have the right of not trying to figure out what's like that conformity thing. And I was like, when I'm receiving this guidance in the morning, it's not like, tell me what to do, God. It's like, it's an organic process. Like, I don't know, like how stardust expanded into the universe. Like, it's
Right.
It's just something that's going to come through me. And so the levity of the personal interaction with my higher power, the people around me, and remembering like where I just did a resentment on envy, which I'll have to tell you about some other time, but where am I? Like, not giving that right of decision to other people is just so key. And not only that, I don't have the power to give it or not give it. So that's the hysterical part. Like, thinking that I have any power anywhere, I have a mild influence over my own life when some grace comes into play. That's it. Everything else. And so when I get to that level, and then it just says me, lighten up. Remember, walks the walk, talks the talk.
That's a spiritual awakening.
Yeah. It was a huge one. And it made me so happy. I was like, my life is full of unmade decisions. That is why I have trouble with my time. That is why I have trouble getting rid of things. That is why I have trouble taking action. And so this right of decision drastically improved my life when I went through these very, very, very uncomfortable, would never have chosen them for me, but 100% truly love that they happened to me at this point in my life.
And one of the terms I noticed just captures what you just said, and that is personal empowerment.
Yes. And that Nathaniel Brandon book was happening at the exact time I read that book, when that happened, because we are responsible to reality. Yeah. We are responsible to things as they are. Yeah. And there is such empowerment in playing the cards we're given.
Because it's not restrictive, it's actually leading us into the doorway of the room of freedom.
Correct. And then I can stand by the door.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the whole point of what a great way to bring, I think, to conclusion our day-to-day. I can stand by the door, which is all about the concepts, creating a structure of carrying the message, and I can stand by the door because there is a door to a room that is supported by the concepts and these principles. And I can help other people find the door and find the room. Yeah, that's a brilliant, and people may not know, Stand by the Door is the name of a poem by Sam Shoemaker, who was the head of the Oxford group when Bill came in, and he wrote that. In fact, he has a book called I Stand by the Door. And if you want to read the poem, it's, I believe, in my second book. It's at the beginning of my second book as a reflection of what the book is meant to be. That book is standing by the door to introduce people to the step process.
Yeah, that's where I read it. Yep.
Let's see what I have here. I know I have some more stuff. Yeah, this is a phrase that comes out of the concepts, and I thought it would be a wonderful meditation. I'm going to read from page 170 of the Language of the Heart, Then I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to take us out with the St. Francis prayer eventually here. But I don't want to conclude unless you're all ready to conclude. If there's any question or comment or experience that somebody is lurking there, almost ready to be brave enough to share or raise their hand or unmute. I don't want to interfere with that so that you don't have a regret when we conclude. If anybody has, I guess in the bars they call it the last call. I don't see anybody reaching for the trigger. So from the language of the heart, the future belongs to you. Page 170. Embrace these new responsibilities eagerly. Fear not, and the grace of God will surely be ours. Alcoholics Anonymous, from the Concepts, has a wonderful meditation, actually, statement about attitude and actions. I like the alliteration, of course. AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, that's the fellowship I'm in, and the major reference point for the development of the concepts. But it's also about attitude and actions. Attitude is my responsibility. It's expressed in the actions of my behavior, carrying the message. It's about freedom, like we were just talking about with Ashley. The freedom and the empowerment when I take responsibility and I own it, that I have authority. Freedom under God to grow in God's image and likeness will ever be the quest of Alcoholics Anonymous or of your own 12-step fellowship. Freedom. Our freedom to serve is truly the freedom by which we have our being, the freedom in which we have our being. Those are very subtle and yet not so subtle. Our freedom to serve, that's what the concepts are all about. To sustain an organization that sustains the groups, that sustains the message. The concepts sustain the group. The traditions, sustains the groups. Yes, the groups are sustained by the traditions, and the steps sustain the individual in the groups. Freedom by which, freedom in which we have our life. This is our way of living. Head in the clouds, steps 10 and 11. Keeping the channel clear, 10, and filled, 11. And keeping our feet on the ground, especially relevant to the concepts. The organization that supports the groups, that supports the individuals. Emotional sobriety, spiritual sobriety, probably synonyms in the final analysis. Are we human beings seeking a spiritual experience? Or are we spiritual beings seeking a human experience? You've heard me if you've heard me. The answer is yes. Yes, human and spiritual. All about relationship. A relationship with reality. A relationship with myself. And a relationship with others. Please join me in this adapted version of the St. Francis prayer. Spirit of the universe, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Step 3 is a commitment to turning. Steps 4 through 9 are the actions of turning. Step 10 through 12 is fostering the lantern that shines the light on the path for others to walk. Please grant me that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, that turning from self-centeredness to other-centeredness, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to this life. Amen. Well, thank you for a very robust discussion. I hope you enjoyed it and learned from it and are motivated from it to turn the burner up and have more light. Thanks, everybody.